I stared at the strange contract with its no alcohol clause, my finger hovering over the signature line. The text seemed to blur slightly as I read it for the third time, as if the words might somehow change if I looked at them long enough. "It's just a standard safety measure," Preston Wade said from across the desk, his tone casual, but with an edge of impatience. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded absently, still fixated on the unusual stipulation. Most job contracts had clauses about not showing up to work drunk, but a complete ban on alcohol consumption, even during off hours. That seemed extreme, especially for a remote location where recreational options would already be limited. "And this applies even in personal quarters?" I asked. Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished surface of his desk. "The camp is small, isolated. One person's poor decisions affect everyone. Trust me, this policy exists for good reason." I ran my hand through my graying hair, feeling the slight tremor in my fingers, a new development over these past restless months. At 45, I'd expected my career trajectory to be more settled by now. Instead, I found myself chasing theoretical formations that most of my colleagues considered outdated pseudoscience. The package had arrived 3 weeks ago. No return address, just my name written in block letters across a manila envelope containing a single crystal specimen and coordinates to an abandoned research facility in northern Alaska. The crystal defied classification, its internal structure unlike anything in geological literature. When I'd shown it to colleagues at the university, they dismissed it as either synthetic or contaminated. But I knew better. This matched the theoretical formations I'd hypothesized in my doctoral dissertation 20 years earlier. "Triple your normal consulting rate," I murmured, more to myself than to Preston. "Triple," Preston confirmed with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Tax-free housing and meals provided, plus a completion bonus that could fund your research for years." He knew exactly which buttons to push. I've been transparent about my research goals during our initial meeting, perhaps too transparent. But after 2 decades of watching my crystalline formation theories gather dust in academic journals, this felt like vindication. I thought about what my wife Jennifer would say. She'd supported my theoretical work for years, understanding my need to prove something the scientific community had largely dismissed. But she'd also grown weary of the consulting jobs that took me away from home for months at a time. This assignment would be different, potentially groundbreaking work that could validate everything I'd theorized. "You're hesitating," Preston observed, tapping his expensive pen against the contract. "Having second thoughts?" "Just being thorough," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's a significant commitment. The time will fly by," he said, with practiced reassurance, "and you'll return with enough funding to pursue your research independently. Isn't that what you want, Dr. Brennan? The chance to prove your theories?" The way he said Dr. Brennan felt almost knowing, as if he understood exactly how frustrating my academic career had become. 2 decades since completing my doctorate in geology, and I still felt like I was defending the same thesis to skeptical colleagues. I picked up the pen, its weight feeling somehow significant in my hand. "The alcohol ban is the least of your concerns in temperatures that drop to -40, Preston added with a chuckle. "You'll be too busy staying warm and doing your job to worry about having a beer." My hand hovered over the signature line. This felt like my last chance to prove the crystalline formation theory that had defined my career. The mysterious package suggested someone at that site understood the significance of what they had found. Perhaps they needed someone with my specific expertise. With a quick motion that allowed no further hesitation, I signed my name on the line. The pen made a scratching sound against the paper that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. "Excellent," Preston said, quickly sliding the contract away as if afraid I might change my mind. "You've made the right decision, Dr. Brennan." As he filed my contract in a folder, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just committed to something far more complex than a standard mining consultation. But what choice did I really have? The academic world had moved on from my theories. This was my chance to prove them in the field. "When do I leave?" I asked. "1 week," Preston replied, handing me a thick envelope. "All your travel documents are in here. The company will handle logistics. Pack for extreme cold, but keep it minimal. The less you bring, the easier your transition will be." I nodded, taking the envelope. 1 week to prepare for what could be the most important assignment of my career. It seemed both too soon and not soon enough. "You won't regret this," Preston said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his palm dry despite the warm office. This job will change your life. As I left the recruitment office and stepped into the gray afternoon, I couldn't help but think about those cryptic coordinates and the crystal sample. Maybe change was exactly what I needed. Maybe this job would indeed transform my career, finally providing the proof I'd sought for 2 decades. Or maybe I just made the biggest mistake of my professional life. But with my theories dismissed by academia and my research funding nearly exhausted, the decision to pursue this opportunity had felt almost inevitable. Sometimes the most important discoveries require taking risks that others wouldn't dare consider. I clutched the envelope containing my travel documents, feeling the weight of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. The journey to reach the remote facility was brutal beyond anything I'd anticipated. The commercial flight to Anchorage had been uncomfortable enough, but it was practically luxurious compared to what followed. The charter plane that carried me north was little more than a flying tin can, rattling and shaking through turbulence that had me gripping the armrests until my knuckles turned white. When we finally touched down, I found myself on a desolate airstrip, if you could even call it that. It was really just a cleared strip of packed snow with a small wooden structure serving as the terminal. The bitter cold hit me like a physical blow as I stepped off the plane, the wind cutting through my layers despite my preparation. I stood there with my single duffel bag, watching the charter plane take off again, leaving me truly alone in this empty corner of Alaska. The vastness of the white landscape stretched in every direction, making me feel smaller than I'd ever felt before. For a moment I wondered what Jennifer would think if she could see me now, standing in the middle of nowhere, chasing a theory that might prove to be nothing more than academic delusion. After about 20 minutes of waiting and wondering if I'd been forgotten, a rugged truck appeared on the horizon, crawling toward me across the snow. It pulled up beside me, its engine rumbling loudly in the otherwise silent landscape. The driver didn't get out to help with my bag. He simply leaned across and pushed open the passenger door. I climbed in, tossing my duffel into the back before settling into the seat. "I'm Carl Brennan," I said, extending my hand. The driver glanced at my hand but didn't take it. He was a large man with a thick beard and a scar across his left cheek. "Dimitri," he replied in a heavily accented voice before putting the truck in gear and pulling away from the airstrip. That was the extent of our conversation for the next 2 hours. I tried making small talk a few times, asking about the facility and the work, but Dimitri responded with grunts or one-word answers until I gave up. Instead, I turned my attention to the landscape passing by outside the window. The frozen tundra stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only occasionally by rocky outcroppings or stunted trees, bent permanently by the relentless wind. We followed no road that I could see, just tracks in the snow made by previous vehicles. I realized with growing unease just how isolated this place was. If anything went wrong out here, help would be a very long way off. The thought made me appreciate the no alcohol policy even more. Out here, clear judgment wasn't just important, it was essential for survival. "First time in Alaska?" Dimitri finally asked, breaking the silence as we crested a small rise. "Yes," I answered, surprised by the sudden conversation. "First time this far north, actually," Dimitri nodded. "You will get used to cold, maybe." Then he pointed ahead. "Facility." In the distance, I could make out a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. As we drew closer, I could see they were mostly prefabricated structures, utilitarian and designed for function rather than comfort. Heavy equipment dotted the area around what I assumed was the mine entrance, and smoke rose from several chimneys. "How many people work here?" I asked. 28, Dimitri replied. 29 with you. The numbers matched what Preston had told me, a small, tight-knit operation focused on specialized extraction. Perfect for the kind of discrete research that my theoretical work suggested might be necessary. We pulled up to the largest building, and Dimitri cut the engine. "Main office," he said, nodding toward the door. "Floyd waits for you." I grabbed my duffel from the back and walked toward the building, my boots crunching in the snow. Before I reached the door, it swung open, and a man stepped out with a broad smile on his face. "Dr. Brennan," he called out, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. "Welcome to Northwind Mining. I'm Floyd Campbell, Facility Director." I was taken aback by his warmth. It was the last thing I'd expected after my silent journey with Dimitri. Floyd was older, maybe late 50s, with a thick salt and pepper beard and matching hair. He wore practical cold weather gear, but of noticeably higher quality than what Dmitri had on. "Thank you," I said, shaking his outstretched hand. "It's good to finally be here." Come in," Floyd said, ushering me inside. "You must be frozen after that trip. We'll get you warmed up." The interior of the building was surprisingly comfortable, well heated and furnished with sturdy wooden tables and chairs. A large map of the mining area dominated one wall, with various geological surveys and charts pinned beside it. I could see immediately that this was a serious operation, not some fly-by-night mineral extraction scheme. "Coffee?" Floyd asked, already pouring me a cup from a pot that sat on a small table in the corner. "Yes, thank you," I said, gratefully accepting the steaming mug. The warmth seeped into my cold hands immediately. "So, how was your journey? Dmitri isn't much of a talker, I'm afraid," Floyd said with a chuckle. "Long," I admitted, "and cold. I knew Alaska would be remote, but I don't think I fully grasped just how isolated this place is until I saw it for myself." Floyd nodded, his expression turning serious. "That's exactly right, Dr. Brennan. We are completely on our own out here. The nearest town is over 200 miles away, and in winter, that might as well be 2,000. He gestured for me to sit at one of the tables, which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you right away. I sat down, wondering if this was where the other shoe would drop. Despite the warm welcome, part of me was still wary about this whole situation. "I understand you might have had some concerns about our no-alcohol policy," Floyd said, taking a seat across from me. "It seems strict, I know, especially for off hours." I nodded cautiously. It was unusual enough to make me hesitate before signing on. "Let me explain," Floyd said, his voice taking on a somber tone. 10 years ago, we had an incident. One of our workers, a good man normally, got drunk one night. He decided to take out one of the excavators, thought it would be fun to clear some new paths in the snow. Floyd paused, his eyes distant. He didn't see the fuel truck parked near the equipment shed. The resulting explosion killed 5 people, including himself. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly, understanding washing over me. After that, we instituted a zero-tolerance policy. No alcohol anywhere in the facility, not even in private quarters. Floyd leaned forward. "Out here, one bad decision can have catastrophic consequences. We can't afford to take that risk again." The explanation made perfect sense. In this environment, with dangerous equipment and extreme isolation, clear heads were essential at all times. "I understand completely," I told him, "and I respect the policy." Floyd's face brightened. "Good, I'm glad that's settled." He stood up. "Now, how about I show you around? You'll want to get your bearings before dinner." We left the main office, and Floyd guided me through the facility. The cold hit me again as we stepped outside, but I was starting to adjust to it already. Floyd pointed out the various buildings as we walked. "That's the mess hall. 3 meals a day, all included as per your contract. The food's simple but hearty. Our cook, Boris, does wonders with limited supplies." He gestured to a row of identical structures. "Those are the living quarters. You'll be in cabin 7, which you'll have to yourself for now." As we walked, I took in just how vast the wilderness was surrounding us. Nothing but snow-covered terrain stretched to the horizon in every direction, broken only by rocky outcroppings and the occasional stand of stunted trees. The isolation was both beautiful and terrifying. "And this," Floyd said with pride, as we approached a large opening in the hillside, reinforced with heavy timber, "is the mine entrance. We'll get you properly oriented with your work area tomorrow. But this is where the real work happens." Several workers were coming off shift, emerging from the mine entrance with tired faces that brightened somewhat when they saw Floyd. He greeted each of them by name, switching effortlessly between English and Russian. "Let's head to the equipment shed," Floyd suggested. "I'll introduce you to some of the crew who should be finishing up there." The equipment shed was a large metal building humming with activity. Inside, workers were maintaining various pieces of mining equipment, drills, conveyor systems, and other machinery I couldn't immediately identify. Everyone worked with the focused efficiency of experienced professionals. "Everyone," Floyd called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'd like you to meet our new geologist, Dr. Brennan." The workers paused what they were doing, looking up at me with varying degrees of interest. Most nodded politely before returning to their tasks, but a tall blond man approached us, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ah, Lars," Floyd said. "Perfect timing. Dr. Brennan, this is Lars Eriksson, our Norwegian engineer. He's been with us for 4 years now." "Good to meet you," Lars said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his English accented but clear. Another non-Russian in the mix. You'll be a welcome addition. Lars keeps our equipment running when it should be falling apart, Floyd explained. He's a miracle worker with machinery. Just practical solutions to practical problems, Lars replied modestly. Where are you from in the States, Dr. Brennan? Colorado originally, but I've been moving around for work the last few years, I answered. And please, call me Carl. Carl will be heading up our mineral analysis initiative, Floyd told Lars. We're hoping his expertise will help us better understand the formations we're encountering. Lars nodded. We could use some good insights on that front. The current section has some unusual characteristics. As we continued our tour, Floyd introduced me to more of the crew, mostly Russians with a few Ukrainians mixed in. Most spoke at least some English, though several conversations had to be translated by Floyd. I tried to remember names and faces, but it was overwhelming after the long journey. Most of the men have been here at least 2 years, Floyd explained as we walked back toward the main buildings. It creates a certain camaraderie out here. We're not just colleagues. We're a community. We have to rely on each other. I nodded, beginning to understand the dynamics of the place. Despite my initial reservations and the strange contract stipulations, the facility seemed well run and the people professional. The explanation for the alcohol ban made perfect sense, and Floyd's leadership style appeared to inspire genuine respect from the workers. You'll meet your direct supervisor, Russell Porter, at dinner, Floyd said as we approached my assigned cabin. He's out at one of the test sites today. For now, why don't you get settled in? Dinner's at 6 in the mess hall. My cabin was small but comfortable. A bed, desk, small bathroom with a shower, and enough storage for my minimal belongings. I unpacked my duffel, arranging my clothes in the drawers, and setting up my few personal items on the desk, including a framed photo of Jennifer. The heating system worked well, keeping the space warm despite the freezing temperatures outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking a moment to process everything. The isolation was more extreme than I'd imagined, but the setup seemed legitimate, and the explanation for the unusual contract terms made sense. For the first time since signing those papers in Preston's office, I felt like maybe I hadn't made a mistake after all. This could be the breakthrough I'd been seeking for 20 years. At 6 o'clock, I made my way to the mess hall, where long tables were filled with workers engaged in conversation in a mix of languages. The smell of hearty stew filled the air, making me realize how hungry I was after the long day of travel. Floyd waved me over to a table where he sat with Lars and another man I hadn't met yet. Carl, this is Russell Porter, your supervisor, Floyd said as I sat down. Russell was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with a weathered face and calculating eyes that sized me up immediately. Dr. Brennan, he said, nodding. Floyd tells me you're something of an expert on mineral formation in unusual conditions. That was my doctoral focus, I confirmed, though I've worked in various operations since then. Good, Russell said, because what we're dealing with here isn't like anything in the textbooks. The formations we're finding break conventional patterns. As we ate, Russell explained some of the unusual geological features they'd encountered, and I found myself genuinely intrigued. The scientific challenges presented were fascinating, exactly the kind of work I'd been hoping for, but hadn't found in my recent string of disappointing contracts. Looking around the mess hall at my new colleagues, the sole American among Russians, Ukrainians, and one Norwegian, I felt a cautious optimism building. The isolation was extreme, the conditions harsh, but the work was real and potentially groundbreaking. I spent the next 3 weeks settling into life at the facility, finding my rhythm in this isolated corner of Alaska. Russell proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, showing me specialized techniques for mineral analysis that weren't covered in any textbook I'd studied during my doctorate. You see this formation? Russell asked during my first week, pointing to what looked like an ordinary rock face. In normal conditions, standard minerals form here, but nothing about this place follows normal patterns. He taught me to identify subtle indicators in the rock that suggested unusual mineral presence. Slight discolorations, minute pressure patterns, and crystalline structures that seemed inconsistent with known geological processes. The work required both precision and physical endurance. My hands, soft from years of academic work, quickly developed calluses from handling equipment in the freezing temperatures. The days blurred together in a routine of early mornings, long hours at various test sites, and evenings spent analyzing samples. Despite the grueling schedule, I found myself enjoying the work more than I had expected. There was something refreshing about the straightforward nature of the job. No departmental politics, no grand applications, just the pure pursuit of geological discovery. The crew, though initially reserved around me, gradually opened up. Most were Russians or Eastern Europeans with limited English, but we developed a workable pidgin of technical terms, hand gestures, and the universal language of shared meals. Lars often acted as an informal interpreter, having picked up enough Russian during his years at the facility. "They're saying you work too carefully," Lars translated one evening in the mess hall as a group of miners laughed good-naturedly. "They bet you were a professor before coming here." I smiled and shrugged. "Tell them careful keeps you alive in places like this." This earned approving nods from the older workers. The camaraderie that developed among us made sense. When the nearest town was over 200 miles away, your colleagues became your entire social world. I found myself thinking less about Jennifer and home, absorbed in the work and the unique challenges it presented. On my 23rd night at the facility, something pulled me from sleep. At first, I thought it was the wind, which often howled around the cabin corners. But this sound was different, not the mechanical whirring of the heating system or the natural moans of Arctic wind. It was something between a moan and a whisper, with an almost human quality that raised the hair on my arms. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, straining to hear. The sound came again, closer this time, just outside my cabin. I fumbled for my glasses on the nightstand and checked my watch, 3:22 in the morning. The noise continued, a rhythmic whispering moan that seemed to circle my cabin. I pulled on my thermal pants and a sweater, then grabbed my heavy coat and boots. Whatever was out there, I needed to see it. I opened my door cautiously, the frigid air rushing in and stealing my breath. The facility was dark, except for the security lights mounted on poles between buildings, casting pools of yellowish light on the packed snow. I stepped outside, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin in the vast darkness. The sound had stopped. I stood still, listening, but heard only the distant hum of the generators. The temperature must have been 30 below, and my breath formed thick clouds in front of my face. I walked around my cabin, following where I thought the sound had come from. That's when I noticed them. Footprints in the fresh snow. They weren't animal tracks, but human prints from standard-issue work boots like those we all wore. The tracks formed an odd pattern, as if someone had been pacing around my cabin before heading off toward the main part of the facility. I followed the footprints, which led straight toward the mine entrance. They stopped abruptly at the security checkpoint, where the night shift would be working. I considered going inside to investigate further, but I didn't have my ID badge, and something about the whole situation made me hesitate. I returned to my cabin, troubled by what I'd heard and seen. It took me hours to fall back asleep, and when my alarm went off at 6, I felt groggy and unsettled. At breakfast, I spotted Russell at his usual table and decided to ask him about the strange occurrence. I grabbed my tray of eggs and porridge and sat across from him. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Something weird happened last night. I heard these sounds outside my cabin, not animals or anything, almost like someone moaning or whispering." Russell's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Sounds?" "Yeah, around 3 in the morning. When I went out to check, I found footprints leading to the mine." Russell's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He set down his fork and took a long drink of coffee. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," he said, his voice deliberately light. "It does strange things out here, bouncing off the valley walls. Makes all kinds of noises that sound human." "But the footprints." "Night shift workers," he cut in quickly. "They take smoke breaks, wander around. Nothing to worry about." He pushed his tray away and stood up. "Speaking of work, we need to get to the eastern site early today. The core samples from yesterday showed promising formations." I nodded, though his explanation felt hollow. As we left the mess hall, I noticed several workers at nearby tables avoiding eye contact with me. One man, a Ukrainian driller named Oleg, who usually greeted me warmly, suddenly became very interested in his food when I looked his way. Throughout the morning, I tried to focus on the work, but the strange incident and Russell's dismissive reaction kept nagging at me. We spent hours at the Eastern Test Site, drilling core samples and running preliminary analyses. Russell was more demanding than usual, keeping me busy enough that I had little time to dwell on what had happened. In the afternoon, as we were returning to the main facility with our samples, I spotted Floyd and Dimitri near the equipment shed. They appeared to be in the middle of an intense argument. Dimitri towered over Floyd, gesturing forcefully, while Floyd shook his head repeatedly. Their voices were too low to make out any words, but their body language spoke volumes. I slowed my pace, trying to observe without being obvious. Dimitri jabbed a finger toward the mine, his face flushed with anger even beneath his beard. Floyd kept shaking his head and making calming gestures with his hands. Then, as if sensing my presence, both men turned and saw me watching. Their argument ceased immediately. Floyd forced a smile and waved, while Dimitri's face returned to its usual impassive mask. "Everything okay?" I called out, pretending I'd just noticed them. "All fine, Carl," Floyd replied with forced cheerfulness. "Just discussing some equipment issues. How are those Eastern samples looking?" "Promising," I said, matching his casual tone. "Russell thinks we might have hit something interesting." "Excellent. That's what I like to hear." Floyd clapped Dimitri on the shoulder, a gesture that looked strangely artificial. "We'll catch up at dinner." I nodded and continued toward the lab, feeling their eyes on my back as I walked away. The interaction left me with a growing sense of unease. That evening, after processing samples and eating a quiet dinner, I returned to my cabin early. I took a hot shower, hoping it would help me relax enough to sleep properly. As I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft rustling sound from the direction of my door. I opened it quickly, hoping to catch whoever was there, but the area outside my cabin was empty. Looking down, I noticed a small piece of paper on the floor that hadn't been there before. Someone had slipped it under my door while I was in the shower. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. The message was handwritten in block letters, the penmanship deliberate and careful. "Don't drink the water after midnight." I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of the warning. Was this someone's idea of a joke? Or was there something genuinely wrong with the water supply at night? I thought about the strange sounds, the evasive behavior, the argument between Floyd and Dimitri, and now this cryptic warning. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note still in my hand, wondering what exactly I had gotten myself into at this remote Alaskan facility. For 3 days, I'd kept the strange note hidden in my desk drawer, taking it out periodically to examine the block letters. "Don't drink the water after midnight." Each time I read it, I felt the same chill. After turning it over in my mind repeatedly, I decided there was only one way to find out what was happening. I needed to see for myself. That night, I set my watch alarm for 12:30. When it buzzed against my wrist, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling of my cabin. I dressed quickly in the dark, thermal layers, heavy pants, and my parka. I grabbed my flashlight but kept it off. The less attention I drew to myself, the better. The facility was eerily quiet as I slipped out of my cabin. The temperature had dropped well below 0, and my breath formed thick clouds in front of my face. The only light came from security lamps positioned at intervals around the perimeter, casting long shadows across the packed snow. Most of the cabins were dark, though I noticed a faint glow from the windows of the main office building. I made my way carefully toward the water treatment facility, a squat, utilitarian structure located behind the mess hall. The facility's water came from a deep well, pumped up and stored in tanks where it was filtered and treated before being distributed to the buildings. I positioned myself behind a stack of empty supply crates about 50 yards from the facility, giving me a clear view of the entrance while keeping me hidden. For nearly half an hour, I waited, the cold seeping through my layers until my toes began to ache. Just as I was considering returning to my cabin, movement caught my eye. 2 figures approached the water facility from the direction of the main office. Even in the dim light, recognized Floyd's bulky silhouette and salt and pepper beard. The second man was shorter, wearing a heavy coat with the hood pulled up. As they got closer to one of the security lights, I recognized Dr. Alexei Fedorov, the facility physician who conducted our monthly health checks. They entered the facility without speaking. About 15 minutes later, the lights inside flicked on briefly, then off again. I crouched lower behind the crates, watching as they emerged. Floyd was carrying what looked like an empty canister. They spoke briefly in hushed tones before separating. Floyd heading back toward the main office, while Dr. Fedorov walked toward the residential cabins. I waited until they were well out of sight before making my way back to my cabin, careful to avoid the pools of light from the security lamps. Inside, I turned on my sink tap and filled a small plastic sample bottle I'd taken from the lab. I labeled it before and noted the time. 12:58. I sat at my desk, staring at the bottle, then at my watch. When the digital display clicked over to 1 odd a.m., I filled a second bottle, labeled it after, and hid both in my desk drawer beside the note. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, wondering what I'd just witnessed. What were they adding to the water, and why after midnight? The next evening, I made sure to be one of the first at dinner. I ate quickly, barely tasting the beef stew and bread, then excused myself while most of the facility staff were still filing into the mess hall. With everyone occupied with dinner, I had my chance. I made my way to the small laboratory where we analyzed core samples. The lab wasn't sophisticated. Basic equipment for geological testing, not comprehensive chemical analysis. But it would have to do. I locked the door behind me and pulled the 2 water samples from my pocket. Under normal circumstances, I would have run the samples through proper protocols, but I didn't have that luxury. Instead, I performed basic tests: pH, conductivity, mineral content, anything that might reveal differences between the samples. The results were puzzling. Both samples contained the expected minerals for groundwater in this region, but the after sample showed significantly higher concentrations of several compounds I couldn't readily identify. One in particular registered unusual properties when tested with the spectrophotometer, absorbing light at wavelengths that didn't match any standard mineral profile in my experience. Whatever Floyd and Dr. Fedorov had added to the water, it wasn't standard treatment chemicals. I carefully disposed of the tested samples, cleaned the equipment to remove any trace of my unauthorized testing, and slipped out of the lab. Back in my cabin, I made a decision. I would stop drinking water after dark. From now on, I would fill my water bottle before dinner and make it last until morning. The changes were subtle at first. Within days, I began to notice I felt sharper during the morning shifts while others moved sluggishly. Oleg, who worked the drill next to mine, often complained of headaches and strange dreams. He kept a large water bottle at his station, refilling it frequently from the tap. Other workers showed similar symptoms: morning lethargy, complaints about sleeping poorly, occasional disorientation. I began to notice patterns. The workers who seemed most affected were the ones I regularly saw drinking water throughout the evening. Russell, too, seemed affected. During our morning briefings, he sometimes lost his train of thought mid-sentence, staring blankly before continuing as if nothing had happened. When I asked if he was feeling well, he brushed it off as winter fatigue. After about a week of avoiding evening water, I decided to confide in Lars. Of all the people at the facility, he seemed most like me, an outsider, observant, and not entirely comfortable with the facility's dynamics. I caught up with him as he was finishing repairs on one of the core sample drills in the equipment shed. "Got a minute?" I asked, glancing around to make sure we were alone. Lars wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Have you noticed anything strange about the water here?" His expression changed subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tensing of his shoulders. "What do you mean by strange?" "I received a note," I said quietly, "warning me not to drink the water after midnight." Lars was silent for a long moment, his pale blue eyes studying my face. Finally, he sighed. "I stopped drinking the facility water completely 3 months ago. I bring my own supply from town whenever we make a supply run." "Why?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because people who drink it start to change," he said, lowering his voice further. "They get, I don't know how to describe it, compliant, less questioning, and they have dreams." "Dreams?" Lars nodded. "Always the same ones, about red crystals deep in the earth, calling to them." He looked away. 3 workers reported these dreams to Dr. Fedorov last year. All 3 were sent away within a week. "Equipment accidents," Floyd said. "You don't believe that?" "Do you?" Lars countered. I thought about the footprints I'd found circling my cabin, the argument between Floyd and Dmitri, the mysterious note, and now the water. "No," I admitted. "I don't." "Be careful who you trust here," Lars warned. "And whatever you do, keep pretending to drink the water where others can see you. Pour it out when no one's looking. I nodded, grateful to have found an ally, but unsettled by the confirmation of my suspicions. That night, I woke suddenly around 2 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me, but then I heard it, a soft scratching at my door. Not wind, not snow falling, but something deliberate. I lay perfectly still, listening as the scratching continued for several seconds, then stopped. After a minute of silence, I slipped out of bed and moved quietly to the window. Carefully pulling back the edge of the curtain, the security lamp cast enough light for me to see fresh tracks in the snow outside my cabin. They circled completely around the structure, just as before. But this time, I could see they continued on, leading directly toward the mine entrance. I let the curtain fall back into place, my heart pounding. Something was happening at this facility. Something connected to the water, to the mine, to the strange behavior of the workers. And whatever it was, I was now caught in the middle of it. I convinced Lars to help investigate the mine after hours. It hadn't been easy. He'd initially refused, citing the risk to his job and possibly his life. But after I showed him the water samples and explained my theory about the connection between the water treatment and the mine, he finally agreed. "If we're caught, I never helped you," Lars said as we huddled near the equipment shed, our breath forming clouds in the frigid night air. "I have too much at stake." I nodded, pulling my thermal layers tighter. The temperature had dropped well below zero, making the metal fixtures around us creak and groan. The security lights cast long shadows across the snow-packed ground between buildings, creating patches of darkness we could use for cover. "I just need to see what they're hiding," I whispered. "The water, the footprints, the strange behavior, it all leads back to the mine." Lars checked his watch. Just after midnight, most of the facility was asleep, except for the minimal night shift. He pulled his access card from his pocket, turning it over in his gloved hands. "The night supervisor makes rounds every 30 minutes. We'll have small windows to move between checkpoints." His voice was barely audible. "If we time it wrong, we're finished." We waited until the night supervisor completed his round, watching from our vantage point as he disappeared into the mess hall for his usual coffee break. Lars motioned for me to follow, and we moved quickly across the open ground toward the mine entrance. The main entrance was surprisingly quiet. No workers, no machinery running, just the low hum of ventilation systems and emergency lighting. Lars swiped his card at the security checkpoint, and the indicator light blinked green. The heavy door unlocked with a metallic click that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Quick," he whispered, pulling the door open just enough for us to slip through. Inside, the main tunnel stretched ahead, illuminated by widely spaced safety lights that cast more shadows than they dispelled. The air was different here, warmer than outside, with a mineral smell I recognized from years of fieldwork, but with something else underneath, something I couldn't place. We moved deeper into the mine, following the main shaft. I'd been in this section before, during my orientation, but only the areas actively being worked. Lars led, us past the current dig sites toward older sections that had supposedly been tapped out. "The official maps show this tunnel ending about 50 meters ahead," Lars said, his voice low. "But I've seen Floyd and Russell access something beyond that point." As we approached the supposed dead end, Lars slowed, running his hands along the rough tunnel wall. He found a recessed panel hidden behind what looked like an electrical junction box and swiped his card again. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel that wasn't on any of the mine maps I'd studied. "How did you know about this?" I asked, stunned. "I maintain all the equipment. 3 months ago, I was called to fix a ventilation issue. They blindfolded me on the way in, but I counted steps and turns. Took me weeks to find the entrance on my own." The hidden tunnel sloped downward at a steeper angle than the main shaft. The walls were different too, less finished, with strange tool marks that didn't match standard mining equipment. The rock formations began to change as we descended, displaying characteristics I'd never encountered in my geology career. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered, running my hand along a section of wall. "These striations, they're not natural. And this mineral composition..." I trailed off, unable to classify what I was seeing. Lars checked his watch nervously. "We need to hurry. Night shift changes in 20 minutes. The tunnel eventually opened into a massive underground chamber that made me freeze in place. The walls glittered with strange red crystals. Not diamonds, not rubies, not anything I recognized from my years of study. They pulsed with a faint inner light that seemed to intensify as we entered the space. "My God," I breathed, approaching the nearest wall. "This isn't possible." The chamber was roughly circular, about 30 meters across, with the ceiling rising at least 15 meters above us. Mining equipment was positioned throughout the space: specialized drills, collection containers, and what appeared to be extraction apparatus I didn't recognize. "I'll keep watch," Lars said, positioning himself near the tunnel entrance. "Take your samples and let's get out of here." I pulled sample vials from my coat pocket and carefully extracted several crystal fragments from the wall. Up close, the crystals were even stranger. They seemed to respond to my touch, the glow intensifying slightly when my gloved fingers made contact. "These aren't diamonds," I said, sealing the samples. "I've never seen anything like this. The molecular structure must be—" "Someone's coming," Lars hissed, ducking behind a piece of equipment and motioning for me to do the same. I crouched behind a large drilling machine, clutching my sample vials. The sound of footsteps and voices echoed from the tunnel. I recognized Floyd's distinctive baritone immediately. "Latest batch is more potent than the last," he was saying as he entered the chamber. "Dr. Fedorov says the integration rate is improving." A group of workers followed him into the chamber. 6 men I recognized from around the facility, including Oleg, the Ukrainian driller who had been avoiding eye contact with me. They moved with an odd synchronicity, their expressions blank. Floyd approached a collection tank attached to one of the crystal walls. A clear tube ran from the tank to a small machine that hummed softly. He turned a valve, and a reddish liquid flowed into a series of glass containers. "The extraction process is becoming more efficient," Floyd said to someone I couldn't see from my position. "We're getting higher yields with each refinement." He handed each worker a container of the liquid. At his nod, they drank it simultaneously. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The men began to convulse, dropping to their knees. Their skin flushed, taking on a reddish hue that matched the crystals. Several of them made guttural sounds. Not quite screams, but not normal human vocalizations either. I watched in shock, my scientific mind racing to understand what I was witnessing. This wasn't a mining operation. It was something else entirely. The red liquid was changing them, transforming them somehow. As the convulsions subsided, the workers rose to their feet. Their movements were different now, more fluid, almost predatory. Their eyes had changed too, reflecting the light differently. I shifted position to get a better view, accidentally knocking a wrench that had been balanced on the edge of the equipment. It clattered to the ground with a sound that seemed to echo throughout the chamber. Everyone froze. Floyd's head snapped in our direction. "Check the perimeter," he ordered, his voice unnaturally calm. "Someone's here." The altered workers spread out, moving with disturbing efficiency. Lars grabbed my arm, pulling me deeper into the shadows behind the equipment. He pointed to a narrow crevice in the wall behind us, barely visible in the dim light. We squeezed into the opening just as one of the workers rounded the drilling machine. The crevice was tight, forcing us to press against each other as we edged sideways away from the opening. It led to what appeared to be a natural fissure in the rock, possibly an old water channel that had been partially blocked during the mining operation. I could hear the workers methodically searching the chamber, moving equipment and checking every possible hiding place. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain they would hear it. The sample vials pressed uncomfortably against my chest, where I'd tucked them inside my innermost layer. "They're still here," Floyd's voice echoed. "I can sense them." Lars tugged at my sleeve, pointing deeper into the fissure. We inched along the narrow passage, which occasionally widened enough to allow faster movement. After what felt like an eternity, the passage turned upward, eventually connecting with what appeared to be an old ventilation shaft. "Emergency. Exit," Lars whispered. "Leads to the surface about 100 meters from the main entrance." We climbed the rusted ladder inside the shaft, emerging through a hatch partially concealed by equipment behind the mine's main building. The night air hit me like a physical blow after the relative warmth of the underground chamber. Without speaking, we separated and took different paths back to the residential area, minimizing the chance of being spotted together. I reached my cabin first, slipping inside and locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I removed the sample vials from my clothing and hid them in the false bottom of my field kit. 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Lars, his face pale but composed. "We need to analyze those samples," he said quietly. "Meet me in the lab tomorrow after lunch. I'll make sure Russell is occupied with the eastern site inspection. I nodded, still processing what we'd witnessed. Lars, what they were doing down there. Not now, he cut me off. We don't know who might be listening. Tomorrow, when we have facts, we can decide what to do. He left as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving me alone with the samples and the horrifying images of what I'd seen. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to make sense of it all. The crystals, the red liquid, the transformation of the workers. None of it fit within any scientific framework I understood. I carefully removed one of the sample vials, holding it up to the light. The crystal fragment glinted with that same internal glow I'd seen in the chamber. Whatever this substance was, it wasn't just rare or valuable. It was changing people. And Floyd was administering it deliberately. I returned the vial to its hiding place and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Tomorrow, Lars and I would analyze the samples. Tomorrow, we might have answers. But tonight, I knew sleep would be impossible. The image of those workers drinking the red liquid, their bodies contorting as they transformed, played over and over in my mind. I wouldn't let that happen to me. I couldn't. Whatever was happening at this facility, I had to find a way to expose it before it was too late. I woke up with a start, my watch showing 5:45, 15 minutes before my alarm. Something felt wrong. I'd arranged to meet Lars at 5:30 to discuss our next steps after what we'd witnessed in the mine. He was always punctual to a fault. I dressed quickly, pulling on my thermal layers and work clothes before heading to Lars's cabin. The pre-dawn darkness hung heavy over the facility, the security lamps casting long shadows across the packed snow. Only the distant hum of the generator broke the silence. I knocked on Lars's door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Lars, it's Carl. Still nothing. I tried the handle and found it unlocked. Unusual for someone as methodical as Lars. The door swung open to reveal an empty bed, still made from yesterday. The room was freezing, cold, as if it had been opened to the elements. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed Lars's desk chair overturned. His laptop was missing, but papers were scattered across the floor, completely out of character for his meticulous organization. Near the bathroom, I spotted dark smudges on the floorboards. I crouched down, touching one with my fingertip. It was tacky, not fully dried. In the dim light, it looked black, but I knew better. Blood. The nightstand drawer hung open, its contents spilled. Lars's Norwegian passport lay on the floor, along with his personal photos. One showing him with what appeared to be his family, smiling in front of a fjord. He'd never leave these behind, willingly. I carefully closed the door behind me and hurried back to my cabin, my breath clouding in the frigid air. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. They'd found out about our expedition to the hidden chamber. They knew Lars had shown me the crystals. At breakfast, I filled my tray mechanically, scanning the mess hall for any sign of Lars. The usual morning chatter filled the room, but something felt off. Conversations quieted as I passed, eyes following me before quickly looking away. I spotted Russell at our usual table and approached, trying to keep my expression neutral. Morning, I said, sliding onto the bench across from him. Have you seen Lars today? We were supposed to meet about some equipment maintenance. Russell looked up from his oatmeal, his face unreadable. Didn't you hear? Lars had an accident last night in the equipment shed. Pretty bad one. My stomach tightened. What kind of accident? Some kind of electrical malfunction he was trying to fix. Burns, mostly. Floyd had him airlifted to a hospital in Anchorage around 3 this morning. I took a bite of toast to hide my reaction. It was a lie. The nearest place a helicopter could safely land in winter was over 20 miles from the facility. I would have heard it. That's terrible, I said, forcing concern into my voice. Did anyone go with him? No need. Medical transport had their own staff. Russell returned to his breakfast, then added casually, Floyd wants you to take over Lars's inspection schedule until we get a replacement. I'll show you his system after breakfast. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my plate. Sure thing. Throughout breakfast, I noticed Oleg and 2 other workers watching me from across the room. Their skin had a faint reddish tint that hadn't been there before, and they barely touched their food. When I looked directly at them, they immediately turned away. After breakfast, I headed to the lab, claiming I needed to finish processing yesterday's samples before taking on Lars's duties. Once alone, I locked the door and retrieved the crystal samples from their hiding place in my field kit. The red crystals glowed faintly, even under the fluorescent lights. I placed a small fragment under the microscope and began my analysis. The crystalline structure defied conventional classification. It wasn't igneous, metamorphic, or sedimentary. The lattice pattern shifted slightly as I watched, almost as if it were responding to observation. I ran the samples through every test available in our limited lab. The spectrometer readings showed elements I couldn't identify, combinations that shouldn't exist in nature. When I compared the results to known minerals in the database, nothing matched. Most disturbing was what happened when I placed a drop of my blood near a crystal fragment on a slide. The blood cells began to change structure, their membranes altering in real time as they approached the crystal. It was as if the crystal was rewriting their cellular information. I was so absorbed in my observations that I almost missed the strange sensation in my left hand. Looking down, I noticed a reddish patch spreading across my palm and fingers, exactly where I'd handled the raw crystal earlier. Panic surged through me. I rushed to the sink, scrubbing my hands with soap and hot water until my skin was raw. The redness remained, though it didn't spread further. I dried my hands and examined them closely. The affected skin felt warmer than the surrounding area, with a slight tingle that hadn't been there before. I carefully packed away the samples and erased all evidence of my tests. Whatever these crystals were, they were changing the workers who drank the liquid extracted from them. And now, despite my precautions, they were changing me too. As I left the lab, I passed the main office and overheard Floyd's voice through the partially open door. He was speaking on the radio, his tone urgent. Yes, another one was becoming aware, the Norwegian. We've contained him, but the American might be compromised too. He's showing signs. A pause, then, understood. We'll implement containment protocols immediately. The ceremony is scheduled for tonight. We'll know then. I kept walking, not daring to slow down or look back. My heart hammered in my chest as I headed toward the equipment shed, ostensibly to learn Lars's maintenance schedule. Throughout the afternoon, I went through the motions of work, all while planning my escape. The facility was over 200 miles from the nearest town through brutal terrain. I'd need supplies, navigation tools, and transportation to have any chance of survival. After dinner, Russell approached me with a friendly clap on the shoulder that felt anything but friendly. Carl, good news. Floyd wants to properly welcome you to the team tonight. We have a little ceremony for those who've proven themselves. Nothing formal, just drinks and a proper introduction to what we're really doing here. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I forced enthusiasm into my voice. That sounds great. What time? 9 o'clock at the old storage building behind the mine entrance. Dress warm. The heating's not great back there. He lowered his voice. This is a big honor, Carl. Not everyone gets this invitation. I nodded, matching his conspiratorial tone. I appreciate it. I'll be there. As soon as I returned to my cabin, I began packing. I took only what was essential. My heaviest cold weather gear, emergency rations from my personal stash, compass, map, first aid kit, and matches. I wrapped the crystal samples carefully and tucked them into an inner pocket of my parka. I checked my watch. 7:30. I had about an hour before anyone might become suspicious of my absence from the common areas. The snowmobiles were kept in a garage near the main gate, but they would be locked and possibly guarded. As I zipped up my backpack, a soft knock came at my door. I froze, then quietly moved to the side window, peering out. Dimitri stood at my door alone, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Another knock, more insistent this time. Brennan, I know you're in there, Dimitri said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to take you to Floyd. I want to help you get out before it's too late. I hesitated, weighing my options. Dimitri had always been taciturn, keeping to himself, but he'd also been arguing with Floyd. Perhaps he disagreed with what was happening at the facility. I opened the door just enough to see him clearly, ready to slam it shut if necessary. Dimitri looked at my packed bag and nodded. Good, you're already preparing. He glanced behind him again. We don't have much time. They're getting ready for you. I cautiously opened the door wider. What's going on here? I'm not who you think I am, Dimitri said, his voice low and measured. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and produced a small leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal an identification card with official government markings. I studied the ID. noting the Federal Security Service insignia. The photo matched Dimitri's scarred face, though he looked younger, clean-shaven. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you've seen too much," Dimitri glanced toward the window. "And because that red mark on your hand means you're running out of time." I instinctively covered my wrist where the reddish patch had been spreading. "What is it? What's happening to me?" Dimitri moved to the small table in my cabin, unfolding a map he'd kept inside his jacket. "The crystals are an unknown mineral compound. My agency has been tracking reports of strange activities here for years, but we couldn't get solid evidence until I was placed inside." He tapped a finger against the map. "This entire mining operation is a front. The standard minerals are real, but they are secondary. What Floyd and his backers want are the red crystal formations." "For what purpose?" I asked. "They process the crystals into a liquid compound and administer it to test subjects, the workers. When consumed, it alters human biology at the cellular level." Dimitri's eyes met mine. "You've seen what happens to them." The image of Oleg and the others flashed through my mind. Their reddish skin, the strange vacancy in their eyes. "Who's behind this?" I asked. "Not just Floyd, private interests with deep pockets, but they believe—" Dimitri hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "They believe the crystals have extraterrestrial origins, that they can evolve humans to what they call a higher state." I laughed nervously. "That sounds insane." "I've seen the lab reports. The crystal structure doesn't match anything in our geological records," Dimitri said, folding the map and pointing to a marked location. "There's a research station 100 miles south of here. Scientists who can help you analyze what you found and stop whatever is happening to your body." My mind raced through the implications. "And Lars? What happened to him?" Dimitri's expression darkened. "He discovered too much. I tried to warn him to be careful, but..." He shook his head. "We need to move now. The ceremony they invited you to, it's when they administer the highest concentration of the compound. Once that happens, there's no turning back." He led me outside, moving carefully through the shadows between buildings. The facility was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of generators breaking the silence. We reached the vehicle storage shed, and Dimitri used a key to unlock the side entrance. "Take this snowmobile," he whispered, pointing to a newer model near the back. "I've disabled the GPS tracker and filled the tank. It should get you to these coordinates." He handed me a small piece of paper with numbers written in precise handwriting. I tucked the paper into my inner pocket, making sure my pack with the crystal samples was secure. "What about you?" I asked. "I'll create a diversion to give you time. My extraction team is already en route, but they won't arrive for another 24 hours. Just as I mounted the snowmobile, a piercing alarm blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights began flashing from the main building, casting bloody shadows across the snow. "They've discovered something," Dimitri muttered, pulling out a handgun from beneath his coat. "Change of plans. Go now." I gunned the snowmobile's engine and burst from the shed, aiming for the eastern fence line where Dimitri had indicated a weak point. The machine roared beneath me as I crashed through a section of chain link, racing into the vast Alaskan wilderness toward uncertain salvation. I navigated the snowmobile through the endless white expanse, pushing the machine to its limits. The bitter Alaskan wind cut through my layers despite the thermal gear, but the cold was the least of my worries. The red mark on my wrist had spread halfway up my forearm, bringing with it a strange tingling sensation that I couldn't ignore. The engine roared beneath me as I followed the coordinates Dimitri had given me, checking the paper occasionally to make sure I was still on course. The research station was my only hope now, both for answers about these crystals and perhaps a way to stop whatever was happening to my body. A distant mechanical growl cut through the howling wind. I glanced over my shoulder and my stomach dropped. 3 bright headlights bounced across the tundra behind me, maybe 2 miles back, but closing fast. The facility had sent pursuers. I cursed under my breath and twisted the throttle harder, but the snowmobile was already at maximum speed. My pursuers likely had faster machines, probably the high-powered models I'd seen in the equipment shed that Floyd reserved for special operations. The flat tundra offered no cover, nowhere to hide. About half a mile ahead, I spotted a dense line of trees marking the beginning of a forest. If I could reach it, I might lose them among the trees where their speed advantage would mean nothing. I leaned forward, willing the snowmobile to go faster. The tree line grew closer as the engines behind me grew louder. My heart pounded as I entered the forest, immediately slowing to navigate between the tightly packed pines. The snowmobile wasn't built for this kind of terrain, but I had no choice. I weaved through the trees, the headlight illuminating only a few feet ahead. The pursuing engine still sounded behind me, but more distant now. A flash of gray appeared in my headlight beam. I yanked the handlebars hard to avoid what looked like a fallen log, but the sudden movement sent the snowmobile sliding sideways. Before I could correct, the right ski hit something solid hidden beneath the snow, and the world spun violently. I was thrown clear of the machine, landing hard in a snowdrift. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. For several seconds, I lay there gasping, the cold seeping through my clothes. When I finally managed to sit up, I saw the snowmobile 10 feet away, its front end crumpled against a tree. I staggered to my feet and limped to the machine. One ski was completely sheared off, the handlebar bent at an unnatural angle. It was beyond repair. The distant sound of engines reminded me I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my pack containing the crystal samples and checked that the coordinates were still secure in my inner pocket. According to the map Dimitri had shown me, the research station was still about 40 miles south. On foot, in these conditions, that would take days if I survived at all. But I pressed on, following my compass south through increasingly heavy snow. The blizzard that followed nearly killed me, but somehow I managed to find shelter in a small cave, conserving body heat through the worst of the storm. On the third day, hypothermic and barely conscious, I finally reached the research station. The facility emerged from the snow like a salvation, a collection of low gray buildings with satellite dishes and antennas. I collapsed against the main entrance, pounding weakly with hands that no longer looked entirely human. The skin stretched over a lattice of red, crystalline structures. Scientists in hazmat suits rushed me inside, their expressions mixing fear with fascination. Dr. Helen Torres, the lead researcher, explained they'd been monitoring the Northwind operation for months. 3 workers had escaped before me, but none had made it this far with samples intact. The treatments they administered stopped the transformation's progression, though they couldn't reverse what had already happened. The red patterns remained visible beneath my skin, and I retained certain enhanced senses. I could detect electrical fields and sense mineral deposits in ways that shouldn't be humanly possible. Most importantly, the crystal samples I'd carried provided the evidence needed to shut down the operation. A government task force raided the facility within hours, though they found it largely abandoned. Floyd and most of his team had vanished, but the underground chamber was secured, and the remaining altered workers were taken into protective custody for treatment. I never returned to my old life completely. The transformation had changed me too fundamentally, and the classified nature of what I'd experienced meant certain freedoms were permanently restricted. But I was alive, and I was still essentially human, something that might not have been true if I'd remained at that facility even one more day. Jennifer understood when I finally explained what I could. The enhanced capabilities proved useful in my new government consulting work, analyzing unusual geological phenomena. It wasn't the academic career I'd once dreamed of, but it was meaningful work that helped prevent others from suffering what I'd experienced. Sometimes, late at night, I could still feel the crystals calling, a faint whisper in my enhanced consciousness suggesting there were more deposits out there, more secrets buried in the earth. But I'd learned the value of some knowledge remaining hidden. The red patterns beneath my skin served as a permanent reminder of how thin the line between human and something else could be, and how precious it was to choose which side of that line to remain on.